This is the History of New Zealand podcast on the Eat to My Own Beat podcast network. Welcome back to episode 27 of the History of New Zealand podcast. Strategy and tactics of the New Zealand Wars. Campaigners on both sides of the New Zealand Wars had developed distinctive war strategies and tactics. The British set out to fight a European-style war based on engaging with the opposing forces, besieging and then capturing fortified positions. The British Army were professional soldiers who had experience fighting in various parts of the empire, many from India and Afghanistan, and were led by officers who were themselves trained by men who had fought at Waterloo. Many of the Maori fighters had been raised during the Musket Wars, the decades-long bitter intertribal fighting during which warriors had perfected the art of building defensive fortifications around a pa. During the Flagstaff War, Kawati and Heki appeared to have followed a strategy of drawing the colonial forces into an attacking fortified pa, from which the warriors would fight from a strong defensive position that was secured by cannon fire. The word pa means a fortified strong point near a Maori village or community. They were built with a view of defense, but primarily they were built to safely store food. The pa at Pukettu and Ohaowai were the first of the so-called gunfighter pa, built to engage enemies armed with muskets and cannons. A strong wooden palisade was fronted with woven flax leaves, whose tough, stringy foliage absorbed much of the force of ammunition. The palisade was lifted a few centimeters from the ground, so muskets would be fired from underneath rather than over the top. Sometimes there were gaps in the palisade, which led to killing traps. There were trenches and rifle pits to protect the occupants and later very effective artillery shelters. They were usually built so that they were almost impossible to surround completely, but usually presented at least one exposed face to invite attack from that direction. They were cheap and easily built. The Lapa at Wataria was constructed by 80 men overnight, and they were completely expendable. The British repeatedly mounted often lengthy expeditions to besiege a pa, which would absorb their bombardment and possibly one or two attacks, and then abandoned by the Maori. Shortly afterwards, a new pa would appear in another inaccessible site. Pa like these were built in dozens, particularly during the First Taranaki War, where they eventually formed a cordon surrounding New Plymouth in the Waikato campaign. For a long time, the modern pa effectively neutralized the overwhelming disparity of numbers and armaments. At Ohaowai Pa in 1845, Rangagiri in 1863, and again in Gat Pa in 1864. British and colonial forces discovered that the frontal attacks on the defended pa were extremely costly. At Gate Pa, during the 1864 Taranangu campaign, Maori withstood a day-long bombardment in their underground shelters and trenches. The palisade destroyed, British troops rushed the pa, whereupon the Maori fired at them from hidden trenches, killing 38 and injuring many more in the most costly battle for the Pākehā at the New Zealand Wars. The troops retired and Maori abandoned the pa. When the British could defeat Maori in battle, defeats were often not decisive. For example, the captured Ruapakapapa can be considered a British tactical victory, but the purpose built as a target for the British, and its loss was not damaging. Heki and Kawati managed to escape with their forces intact. However, British force consisted of professional soldiers supported by an economic system capable of sustaining them in the field almost indefinitely. In contrast, the Maori was a part-time fighter who also needed to work on the producing food. The biggest problem for the Maori was their society was ill-adapted to support a sustained campaign. A long campaign would disrupt food supplies, and epidemics resulted in significant numbers of deaths among the Maori. The British soon realized this was the easier way to neutralize a pa. Although cheap and easy to build, a gunfighter pa required a significant input of labor and resources. Destruction of Maori economic bases in the area around the pa would make it difficult for the hapu to support the fighting men. There was a reasoning behind the bush scouring expeditions of the Shute and McConnell in the Second Taranaki War. Thank you for listening to the History of New Zealand podcast. We're found on YouTube and anywhere else you could find your normal podcasts. Please like, comment, and subscribe, or find us at www.eattomyownbeat.com.